The crisp December morning air carried the scent of pine and frost across the vast grounds of Sandringham Estate. Princess Catherine stood by the tall windows of the drawing-room, watching the mist slowly lift from the ancient oak trees that had witnessed generations of royal memories. Her fingers traced the cool glass as she observed the groundskeepers preparing the walking paths, their breath forming small clouds in the winter chill. Behind her, the gentle sounds of breakfast filled the cozy family room. Prince George was carefully buttering his toast, his concentration absolute as he tried to cover every corner perfectly. Princess Charlotte giggled softly as she attempted to balance a spoonful of jam without letting it drip, while little Prince Louis bounced excitedly in his chair, already dressed in his warmest coat despite breakfast not being finished. "Mummy, when can we go outside?" Louis asked, his bright blue eyes sparkling with anticipation. At 5 years old, he possessed an endless energy that seemed to multiply in the countryside. The freedom of Sandringham always brought out the most joyful side of all three children, but Louis especially loved the wide open spaces where he could run without worry. Catherine turned from the window, her heart swelling with a familiar warmth as she looked at her three beautiful children. Each morning brought new challenges and joys in raising them, but moments like these reminded her of the simple happiness that family life could bring. "As soon as you finish your breakfast properly, my love," she replied, moving to sit beside Charlotte, who was now wearing more jam than she had eaten. The estate held special meaning for Catherine and William. It was here that they had spent some of their most precious family moments, away from the constant attention of London life. The children could simply be children here, climbing trees, building snow forts in winter, and exploring the endless gardens and woodland paths. For Catherine, these visits represented everything she had hoped for when she married into the royal family, the chance to give her children a childhood filled with nature, freedom, and genuine family connection. George, now 11, had grown more thoughtful during these country visits. He often walked quietly beside his mother, asking questions about the trees, the history of the estate, or sometimes sharing his thoughts about school and friends. Catherine treasured these conversations, knowing that as he grew older, such open moments might become rarer. She had learned to listen carefully to his questions, understanding that beneath his polite exterior, he was processing the unique challenges of growing up as a future king. Charlotte, 9 years old and, full of spirited independence, brought a different energy to their family walks. She had inherited her great-grandmother's love of horses and often begged to visit the stables during their Sandringham stays. Her curiosity about everything around her kept Catherine constantly engaged, answering questions that ranged from why leaves changed color to how long the royal family had owned the estate. Charlotte's fearless spirit reminded Catherine of herself at that age, always ready for adventure. The morning light grew stronger as the family finished breakfast. William appeared in the doorway, having just finished a brief call with his private secretary. His face immediately relaxed as he saw his family gathered around the table, Louis now attempting to feed pieces of his toast to an imaginary friend. "Ready for our adventure?" William asked, ruffling Louis's hair. The little prince nodded enthusiastically, jumping down from his chair and, running to get his favorite walking stick, a smooth piece of driftwood they had found during a summer visit to the Norfolk coast. Catherine began the familiar routine of ensuring everyone was properly dressed for the December weather. Hats, scarves, and warm gloves were distributed, with the usual negotiations about who would wear what. Charlotte insisted on wearing her bright red coat, claiming it would help them spot her if she climbed too high in any trees. George quietly put on his navy jacket, already adopting the careful composure that seemed to come naturally to him. As they prepared to leave, Catherine caught her reflection in the hall mirror. She saw a woman who had found her balance between the public role she had accepted and the private joy she found in motherhood. The past few months had been particularly meaningful for her, as she had watched each of her children grow and develop their own personalities and interests. George was becoming more confident in his public appearances, Charlotte was excelling in her studies and sports, and Louis continued to bring laughter to every situation. The heavy oak door of Sandringham House opened with a familiar creak, and the family stepped into the crisp morning air. The estate stretched before them like a living painting, with frost-covered lawns extending toward the woodland paths they knew so well. Catherine breathed deeply, feeling the stress of recent royal engagements dissolve in the peaceful countryside atmosphere. Louis immediately ran ahead, his energy impossible to contain, while George and Charlotte walked on either side of their parents. The gravel path crunched softly under their feet as they made their way toward their favorite walking route, one that would take them through the formal gardens, past the lake, and into the wooded areas where the children could explore more freely. "Look, Mummy!" Charlotte called out, pointing to a family of rabbits that had ventured onto the lawn. The small creatures froze for a moment before bounding away into the safety of the nearby hedgerow. Such simple moments of connection with nature were exactly what Catherine hoped to give her children, the understanding that the world was full of beauty and wonder if they learned to notice and appreciate it. As they walked, Catherine reflected on how these family times at Sandringham had evolved over the years. When George was Louis's age, every walk had been an expedition of discovery, with constant questions and new adventures. Now, their walks often included deeper conversations about school, friendships, and the world beyond the estate. Charlotte brought her own perspective to everything they saw, often making observations that surprised the adults with their insight. The path led them past Queen Elizabeth's beloved rose garden, now dormant for winter but still maintaining its formal beauty. Catherine often thought of the late Queen during these visits, remembering her stories about childhood Christmases at Sandringham and her deep love for this Norfolk retreat. The children had been fortunate to spend time with their great-grandmother here, learning about family traditions and the importance of finding peace away from public duties. Louis had discovered a particularly interesting stick and was using it to draw patterns in the frost-covered grass alongside the path. His imagination transformed the simple walk into an elaborate adventure story, complete with dragons hiding in the trees and treasure buried beneath the ancient oaks. Catherine smiled as she listened to his narrative, remembering how important it was to preserve and nurture such creativity. The family's pace was unhurried, allowing everyone to enjoy the morning at their own speed. William and Catherine often used these walks to reconnect with each other and their children, discussing plans for the coming days and sharing observations about the children's development. Away from the formality of their official roles, they could simply be parents, focused on the immediate joys and challenges of family life. As they reached the edge of the formal gardens, the landscape opened into rolling countryside dotted with ancient trees. This was where the real adventure would begin, where the children could climb, explore, and let their imaginations run free. Catherine felt her heart fill with anticipation for the morning ahead, knowing that these simple family moments would become the treasured memories her children would carry with them throughout their lives. The winter sun climbed higher in the sky, promising a beautiful day for their Sandringham adventure. Catherine looked at her three children, each so different but all thriving in this environment of love, freedom, and natural beauty. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead in their royal duties, moments like these would always remind her of what truly mattered, the unbreakable bonds of family and the simple joy of being together in the world they were helping to shape for the future. The woodland path beckoned ahead, winding between towering beech trees whose bare branches created intricate patterns against the pale winter sky. Catherine watched as Louis immediately veered off the main path, drawn to a fallen log that had become home to clusters of moss and small fungi. His natural curiosity reminded her so much of William at that age, always finding wonder in the smallest details of the natural world. "Can we climb it?" Louis asked, already scrambling onto the log before waiting for permission. Catherine exchanged an amused glance with William. Their youngest had inherited none of his siblings' caution, approaching life with the fearless enthusiasm that both delighted and occasionally worried his parents. George approached more methodically, studying the log to ensure it was stable before joining his little brother. At 11, he had developed a protective instinct toward Louis that touched Catherine deeply. She often observed how naturally George stepped into his role as the responsible older brother, never making Louis feel excluded but always watching to ensure his safety. Charlotte had discovered something entirely different, a small stream that ran alongside the path, its water dark and swift from recent winter rains. She crouched beside it, mesmerized by the way the current carried fallen leaves downstream. "Mummy, where does this water go?" she asked, her scientific mind already working through the possibilities. Catherine knelt beside her daughter, grateful for these opportunities to engage with the children's natural curiosity. "It flows through the estate and, eventually reaches the sea," she explained. "All the streams and rivers in Norfolk eventually find their way to the North Sea." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully, already imagining the journey each leaf would take from this quiet woodland stream to the vast ocean. William had caught up with the boys on their log adventure, helping Louis balance as he attempted to walk from one end to the other with his arms outstretched like a tightrope walker. These spontaneous moments of play brought out William's own playful nature, reminding Catherine of why she had fallen in love with him. Despite the weight of his future responsibilities, he never lost his ability to connect with simple joys and share them with his children. The family regrouped and continued deeper into the woods, following a path that Catherine had walked countless times but which never failed to reveal something new. The winter light filtered through the bare branches, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. The air was filled with the earthy scent of decomposing leaves and the fresh promise of new growth waiting beneath the winter's surface. As they walked, Charlotte began collecting interesting stones, examining each one carefully before deciding whether it was worthy of her growing collection. She had developed quite an eye for unusual specimens, often finding stones with unique colors or patterns that the adults had missed entirely. Her coat pockets were already bulging with her discoveries, and Catherine made a mental note to help her catalog them later. George had taken on the role of family photographer, using the camera William had given him for his recent birthday. He moved thoughtfully through the landscape, looking for interesting compositions and waiting patiently for the perfect moment to capture his siblings in their natural element. His artistic eye impressed Catherine, who saw in him a sensitivity and attention to detail that would serve him well in whatever path his life would take. Louis, meanwhile, had appointed himself the family's chief explorer, running ahead to scout the path and report back on any interesting discoveries. His reports were delivered with the dramatic flair of a professional expedition leader, complete with elaborate descriptions of the dangerous territory ahead and the magnificent treasures he had discovered around each bend. The path began to slope gently upward, leading to a small hill that offered views across the entire estate. This was one of Catherine's favorite spots, a place where she could see the full scope of the landscape that had become so important to their family's happiness. As they climbed, she reflected on how much had changed since they first brought George here as a toddler. In those early days, every outing had required extensive planning and preparation. Now, the children moved through this environment with complete confidence, knowing every path and landmark. They had developed their own traditions and favorite spots, creating a personal geography that was uniquely theirs. Catherine treasured this sense of belonging they had cultivated, this connection to a place that would always represent safety and family unity. At the top of the hill, they paused to catch their breath and take in the view. The main house was visible in the distance, surrounded by its formal gardens and outbuildings. Smoke rose from several chimneys, creating wispy columns that dissipated quickly in the crisp air. The scene looked timeless, as if it could have been painted centuries ago. "I can see our bedroom window," Charlotte exclaimed, pointing toward the house. The children always enjoyed this perspective, seeing their temporary home from a distance and imagining themselves as tiny figures moving through the vast landscape. It gave them a sense of adventure and importance, as if they were explorers charting unknown territory. William pulled out his phone to capture a family photograph, but Louis protested that it should be more interesting than just standing in a line. He arranged his family according to his vision, with George striking a noble pose, Charlotte holding up her best stone discovery, and himself making what he considered an appropriately adventurous expression. Catherine laughed as she watched him direct the photo session with the confidence of a professional photographer. The resulting image captured more than just their physical appearance, it revealed the genuine joy and connection that defined their family relationships. Catherine knew this photo would join the collection of treasured memories from their Sandringham visits, each image telling the story of their children's growth and their own evolution as a family. As they began their descent down the other side of the hill, the children's energy seemed to multiply. Charlotte discovered a perfect slope for rolling down, despite Catherine's concerns about grass stains on her bright red coat. George joined her, though with more restraint, while Louis threw himself down the hill with complete abandon, tumbling and laughing until he reached the bottom in a dizzy, giggling heap. Catherine found herself running down the hill after Louis, her own laughter mixing with his as they collapsed in a pile at the bottom. William and the other children followed, and soon the entire family was engaged in an impromptu rolling competition down the gentle slope. These moments of pure physical joy reminded Catherine of her own childhood, when happiness was measured by how much grass was in your hair and how loudly you could laugh. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the air enough that the children began shedding layers. Catherine helped Louis out of his extra sweater, noting how rosy his cheeks had become from the exercise and fresh air. This was exactly what she had hoped for from their morning walk, the kind of natural, unstructured play that allowed the children to simply be themselves. As they continued their circular route back toward the house, they encountered other signs of life on the estate. A groundskeeper waved from the distance, tending to one of the garden areas. A few hardy birds called from the trees, their songs adding a musical backdrop to the family's conversation and laughter. The estate felt alive and welcoming, a perfect setting for the memories they were creating together. Charlotte had begun an impromptu nature lesson, pointing out different types of trees and explaining what she had learned about them in school. Her knowledge impressed both her parents and her brothers, who listened attentively as she shared facts about oak trees, their age, and their importance to the local ecosystem. Catherine was proud of her daughter's growing confidence in sharing her knowledge and her genuine interest in the world around her. The path wound through a small copse of evergreen trees, their dark green needles providing a rich contrast to the bare branches of the deciduous trees. The air smelled strongly of pine, reminding Catherine of Christmas preparations and the anticipation that would soon fill the house. Louis immediately began collecting pine cones, announcing his intention to use them for crafting projects later. As they emerged from the trees, the house came into view again, larger now and more welcoming. Catherine felt the familiar mix of satisfaction and slight sadness that came at the end of their family adventures. The morning had provided exactly what she had hoped for, uninterrupted time with her children, opportunities for them to explore and learn, and the simple pleasure of being together in a place they all loved. The memories they had created during this walk would join the growing collection of family experiences that would shape her children's understanding of home, family, and the natural world. Catherine knew that years from now, when her children thought back to their childhood, mornings like this one would stand out as perfect examples of family happiness and connection. The final stretch of their walk took them through the kitchen gardens, where winter vegetables still grew in neat, orderly rows despite the December chill. Catherine paused here, remembering how the late Queen had loved to show the children these productive gardens during their visits. Elizabeth had believed strongly in teaching young people about where their food came from and the importance of sustainable growing practices. Charlotte immediately gravitated toward a patch of Brussels sprouts still standing proudly despite the frost. These look like tiny cabbages, she observed, bending down to examine them more closely. Catherine smiled, knowing that her daughter would probably be less enthusiastic about eating them than studying them, but appreciating her natural scientific curiosity nonetheless. Louis had discovered the herb garden, where rosemary and thyme still released their fragrant oils when touched. He ran his small hands over the plants, creating aromatic clouds that filled the air around him. "It smells like Christmas dinner," he announced, and Catherine realized he was absolutely right. The herbs that would season their holiday meal were growing right here, connecting them directly to the traditions they would celebrate in just a few days. George had found something that interested him even more than plants, the tool shed where the head gardener kept his equipment. Through the window, he could see carefully organized tools, seed packets sorted by type, and notebooks filled with planting schedules and garden plans. His methodical mind was drawn to this kind of organization and forward thinking. "Could we have a garden like this at home?" George asked. Catherine considered the question seriously. Their London residence had limited outdoor space, but perhaps there was room for a small herb garden or some container plants. She had been thinking lately about ways to incorporate more hands-on learning experiences into the children's lives, and gardening could provide lessons in responsibility, patience, and environmental stewardship. William joined the conversation, sharing memories of helping his own grandmother in these same gardens when he was George's age. He described learning to identify different plants, understanding seasonal cycles, and gaining an appreciation for the work that went into producing fresh food. These stories fascinated the children, who loved hearing about their father's childhood experiences and connecting them to their own adventures. As they walked among the garden beds, Catherine reflected on how these simple experiences were shaping her children's understanding of their role in the world. They were learning that even people in positions of privilege and responsibility could and should understand practical matters like food production and environmental stewardship. These lessons would serve them well as they grew into their own roles within the royal family and British society. The path from the kitchen gardens led back toward the main house, but they took a detour through the stable yard where several horses were enjoying their morning turnout in the paddocks. Charlotte's face lit up immediately. Horses had become one of her greatest passions, and she never missed an opportunity to visit them during their Sandringham stays. The stable manager appeared, greeting the family warmly and immediately noting Charlotte's obvious excitement. "Would you like to help with the morning grooming?" she offered. Charlotte looked to her parents with pleading eyes, and Catherine nodded her permission. Watching her daughter's confidence around the large animals never failed to amaze Catherine. Charlotte approached the horses with respect but no fear, speaking to them quietly and moving with the natural horsemanship that seemed to run in the family bloodline. George and Louis were initially more cautious around the horses, preferring to observe from a safe distance. But, as they watched Charlotte confidently brushing a gentle mare, their curiosity overcame their nervousness. Soon, all three children were involved in the grooming process, learning proper techniques and gaining confidence with each brush stroke. Catherine watched this scene with deep satisfaction. These were the kinds of experiences she had dreamed of providing for her children, opportunities to develop real skills, overcome fears, and build confidence through hands-on learning. The horses seemed to sense the children's good intentions, standing patiently and occasionally nuzzling them gently. William shared stories about his own childhood experiences with horses, describing early riding lessons and the special bond he had developed with several horses over the years. The children listened intently, imagining themselves developing similar relationships with these magnificent animals. Catherine could see Charlotte already planning future visits and probably plotting to convince her parents that she needed more regular riding lessons. After their time in the stables, the family continued their leisurely journey back to the house. The morning's adventures had created a perfect combination of physical exercise, learning opportunities, and family bonding. Catherine felt deeply grateful for the privilege of being able to provide such experiences for her children and for the wisdom to recognize their importance. The house grew larger as they approached, its warm stone facade welcoming them home. Smoke continued to rise from the chimneys, promising warmth and comfort after their energizing morning in the crisp air. Catherine could already imagine the cozy scene that awaited them, hot chocolate in front of the fireplace, the children sharing stories about their favorite moments from the walk, and the peaceful satisfaction that came from time well spent together. Louis had grown quieter during the final portion of their walk, his earlier boundless energy now settling into the comfortable tiredness that came from a morning full of fresh air and adventure. Catherine noticed him walking closer to William, occasionally reaching for his father's hand when the path became uneven. These moments of vulnerability balanced perfectly with his earlier displays of fearless exploration. George had become the family's unofficial timekeeper, checking his watch and calculating how long they had been walking. His practical nature appreciated the structure and routine, but Catherine was pleased to notice that he had also fully embraced the spontaneous moments and unexpected discoveries that had made their morning special. Charlotte was already planning their next adventure, suggesting alternative routes they could take and different areas of the estate they could explore. Her enthusiasm for outdoor adventures had grown significantly during their recent visits, and Catherine appreciated how these experiences were building her confidence and independence. As they approached the final turn toward the house, Catherine took a moment to look back at the landscape they had just explored. The winter sun had climbed high enough to burn off the remaining mist, revealing the full beauty of the estate in crisp, clear detail. The bare trees stood like elegant sculptures against the pale sky, and the frost-covered lawn sparkled in the bright light. The morning had provided everything Catherine had hoped for and more. Her children had exercised their bodies, engaged their minds, and strengthened their connection to the natural world and to each other. They had learned new things, overcome small challenges, and created memories that would last a lifetime. Most importantly, they had experienced the simple joy of being a family together, away from the pressures and expectations of their public roles. Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the privilege of raising her children in this environment, where they could experience both the responsibilities of their heritage and the freedom to simply be children. The balance she and William were trying to achieve, between duty and normalcy, between privilege and grounding, seemed perfectly embodied in mornings like this one. As they reached the final approach to the house, Catherine already knew that this walk would join the collection of treasured family memories that would shape her children's understanding of home, family, and their place in the world. The lessons learned during their morning adventure would continue to influence them long after they returned to London and resumed their regular routines. The familiar crunch of gravel under their feet announced their return to the main drive of Sandringham House. Catherine felt the satisfied tiredness that came from a perfect morning spent outdoors with her family. The house seemed to welcome them back, its windows catching the winter sunlight and reflecting the warm yellow light that promised comfort and warmth inside. Louis broke into a run for the final stretch, his energy somehow renewed by the sight of home. He reached the front door first, turning back to wave triumphantly at his family as if he had won an important race. His cheeks were bright red from the cold air and exercise, and his hair stuck up in all directions despite Catherine's earlier attempts to smooth it down. Charlotte arrived next, her pockets still bulging with the stones and pine cones she had collected during their walk. She immediately began organizing her treasures on the front steps, arranging them by size and color while she waited for the rest of the family to catch up. Catherine loved watching her daughter's methodical approach to her collections, seeing in it the same attention to detail that characterized Charlotte's approach to everything she undertook. George approached more sedately, his camera still in hand as he took final shots of the house and grounds. He had become quite serious about photography during their visit, and Catherine was impressed by his artistic eye and patience in waiting for just the right moment to capture each image. She made a mental note to help him develop and print his photos when they returned to London. William reached into his pocket for the house keys, but before he could unlock the door, it opened from the inside. The housekeeper appeared, smiling warmly at the family's return. "Good morning, Your Royal Highnesses," she said, stepping aside to allow them entry. "I hope you enjoyed your walk. I've prepared hot chocolate in the morning room, and cook has made fresh scones." The mention of hot chocolate caused an immediate reaction from all three children. Louis clapped his hands together with excitement, Charlotte quickly gathered up her nature collection, and George carefully stored his camera in its protective case. The promise of warmth and treats was exactly what they needed after their invigorating morning outdoors. As they stepped inside, Catherine felt the familiar embrace of Sandringham's welcoming atmosphere. The house had a unique ability to feel both grand and intimate, formal enough to acknowledge its royal heritage but comfortable enough to serve as a true family home. The contrast between the crisp outdoor air and the warm interior made the house feel even more inviting than usual. In the morning room, a cheerful fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The children immediately gravitated toward the warmth, pulling off their outdoor layers and settling into the comfortable chairs arranged around the hearth. Catherine helped Louis out of his boots, noting that somehow he had managed to collect an impressive amount of mud and leaves during their relatively clean walk. The hot chocolate arrived in a traditional silver service, accompanied by warm scones, fresh butter, and several varieties of jam. Catherine poured for the children while William settled into his favorite chair with a satisfied sigh. These moments of quiet comfort after their outdoor adventures had become one of their most treasured family traditions. As the children warmed up and enjoyed their treats, they began sharing their favorite moments from the morning walk. Louis immediately launched into an elaborate retelling of his adventures with the fallen log, complete with dramatic gestures that nearly upset his hot chocolate. Catherine steadied his mug while encouraging him to continue his story, delighting in his natural storytelling ability and enthusiasm. Charlotte shared her discoveries from the stream, explaining her theory about where the water traveled and showing off her collection of interesting stones. She had clearly been thinking about their conversation during the rest of the walk, and Catherine was impressed by how her daughter processed and built upon new information. Charlotte's scientific mind was evident in the way she asked follow-up questions and made connections between different things she had observed. George quietly showed his parents some of the photos he had taken, describing the artistic choices he had made and the technical aspects of each shot. His thoughtful approach to photography reflected his overall personality, careful, considered, and increasingly confident in his own creative vision. Catherine felt proud watching him explain his work and seeing William's genuine interest in his artistic development. The conversation naturally turned to their plans for the rest of their stay at Sandringham. Christmas was only days away, and the house would soon be filled with extended family members and the delightful chaos that accompanied royal holiday gatherings. The children began discussing which cousins they were most excited to see and what activities they hoped to organize together. Catherine found herself reflecting on how these quiet family moments provided the foundation for the larger celebrations to come. The confidence and happiness her children displayed here at Sandringham would carry over into the more formal aspects of their holiday celebrations. They had learned to find joy in simple pleasures, which would help them navigate the more complex social dynamics of extended family gatherings. As the fire continued to warm the room and the children's chatter filled the air, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment. The morning had provided exactly what she had hoped for, unstructured time for the family to connect with each other and with the natural world around them. These experiences were shaping her children's understanding of what truly mattered in life. William caught her eye across the room and smiled, clearly sharing her satisfaction with how the morning had unfolded. They had both grown up understanding the importance of duty and service, but they were determined to also give their children a foundation of simple family happiness and connection to the natural world. Louis had finished his hot chocolate and was now building an elaborate castle with the sugar cubes from the tea service. Charlotte was carefully cleaning her collected stones with a napkin, preparing to add them to her growing collection. George was writing notes about his photographs in a small notebook, documenting the details he wanted to remember for future reference. These individual activities reflected each child's unique personality while also demonstrating the security and confidence they felt within their family environment. Catherine watched them with the kind of deep maternal satisfaction that came from knowing she and William were successfully providing their children with both the freedom to be themselves and the guidance to grow into thoughtful, capable young people. The morning room gradually filled with the comfortable sounds of family life, quiet conversations, the crackling of the fire, and the gentle rustling of the children's activities. Outside, the December sun continued to climb higher, promising another beautiful day ahead. Catherine knew that these precious hours together would remain in her memory as perfect examples of family happiness. As the immediate warmth and treats began to restore everyone's energy, the children started planning their afternoon activities. Charlotte wanted to organize her nature collection properly, George hoped to work more with his photographs, and Louis was already asking about the possibility of another outdoor adventure. Catherine smiled, realizing that their morning walk had succeeded in its goal of refreshing and inspiring the entire family. The success of their Sandringham morning reinforced Catherine's belief in the importance of providing her children with diverse experiences that balanced their royal responsibilities with normal childhood joys. These moments of freedom and discovery would give them the emotional foundation they would need as they grew into their own roles within the royal family and British society. Looking around the warm, comfortable room at her three beautiful children and devoted husband, Catherine felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built together. The simple pleasure of a family walk followed by hot chocolate by the fire represented everything she valued most about their life together: love, connection, and the creation of memories that would last a lifetime.